and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. Today is Friday, August 24th, 2018. And tonight we're going to be talking about, will Trump turmoil finally unsettle the markets? Before we get to our topic tonight, let's take a look at the markets. Gold, silver, pretty big days today. Gold up nearly 2%, up to 1205, cracking the $1,200 mark for the first time in, I think, about 2 weeks. Opened up around 1186 or so and went straight higher most of the day. Silver, same story, closed at 1477, up over 2%. Still hasn't managed to get back over $15, and it opened at 1453. It hit a high of 1483 and settled back down at 1477. Now, the reason for the rise in the price of gold and silver was attributable to less than hawkish comments coming from Jerome Powell at Jackson Hole. Now, I'm not sure, he didn't say we're not going to raise rates or anything like that, but the speech was interpreted as being more dovish than they had expected. But I also think that both gold and silver were due for a rebound, having really cratered the last few weeks. Also, let's go to the cryptocurrencies before we do a little more gold and silver analysis. Crypto's caught a bit today. Bitcoin up to 6,700, up about 2.5% from about 24 hours ago. Bitcoin Cash moved up a bit, 533. Ethereum up to 281, up from about 2%. And Litecoin up to 58. So it seems that the cryptocurrencies may have bottomed in the range they're in now. Still time to see. Another thing is, just in general, you do see we're coming into the period of time now where people will start to wind down their holidays and get back to work. And I'm talking about the people who have money, the people that are out on holidays in the Hamptons and Cape Cod and Silicon Valley. They take their vacations and they wind them up in August, and then they all come back with whatever fresh ideas that they have on where to spend their money, invest their money, and then the theme starts to develop in the fall. And sometimes that theme is fear, and they come back and everyone sells everything. Other times it means a bull market. Who knows? It's usually, that's why you get these declines in the stock markets in the fall. I think it's a psychological. It's going into winter and people have start to get nervous to try to lock in their gains from the year. Who knows how all the markets work? There's so many things that go on, but you generally do get your stock market crashes in October. But I think what's at play here, which is the topic of our discussion tonight, which is the Trump turmoil, will it finally unsettle the markets? Now, if we go back to when he was first elected, the idea was that if he got elected, it would be a total disaster for the markets. And indeed, that was the conventional wisdom. And many of you remember that it was very similar to when it looked like Brexit was going to be the winner. The stock markets cratered, and then gold and silver had a very big spike higher on that news. And they actually held their gains, gold and silver, for a few weeks. But when it became clear that Trump was going to win that night, gold went ballistic, as did silver. And the stock market futures, I think they were down 900 to 1,000 points. And you had the next day, I think it was, Nobel Prize economist Paul Krugman writing in the New York Times in reaction to the big stock market decline that the markets might not ever recover. And thus was the traditional wisdom. And within about 18 hours from the time he wrote that, the stock market reversed and gold and silver gave up all their gains and went down. Now, that changed, and I think that's just because they needed an excuse. You can always change the narrative, and it goes back to the discussion we had about how they have defined value or redefined value, and it was just based on a new narrative. Oh, Trump is no longer a bad thing for the economy and the stock market. Trump is a good thing. So collectively, the markets convince themselves, or the people directing the markets, that not to worry, that Trump is good for the markets because we'll get Trumpflation. He's going to do infrastructure projects. He may do a tax cut. And then the market just bought onto that. And I assume that when the markets cratered 1,000 points, that was the narrative immediately sent out to all the financial news networks. And then one can only imagine that the central banks put liquidity into the market and began to drive the stock prices back up. And we've had that. And at the time, many of us thought that Trump might create, not necessarily just because of who he was, but because of who his opponents are, a lot of turmoil. And generally, turmoil is bad for the stock market. It's bad for the economy. It creates uncertainty. Now, the problem with Trump was that he was supposedly this outsider, and he had many powerful enemies, including the mainstream media. But somehow, over the last couple of years, even though he's had his battles, Trump turmoil has not impacted the markets really in any negative way. And we haven't seen any safe haven bids. We haven't seen really that have, because if they had held, then gold and silver would be much higher, especially gold. But in a sense, you're looking at the economy and you're seeing the stock market at fairly high levels, and we haven't had the real shock to the economy, and it's almost as if things are stable. However, there's a number of things on the horizon that if we look at, it's very surprising that they haven't sort of jolted the markets or driven the gold and silver prices higher on the uncertainty. And only recently we're starting to see those come clearer into view, even though the prospects were always there. So, for example, with the Federal Reserve, we've always known that Trump could combat whomever, whoever he disagrees with, or it's his attorney general. Eventually, the Fed would end up in his crosshairs, and they have. And he has mused publicly that the Fed maybe shouldn't be on such an aggressive rate hike path because it's going to undo what he called all the fine work he's done in the economy. Now, going against the Fed is generally not a good idea just because they somewhat control how the economy works. It's not supposed to be that way, but they've been granted a mandate for full employment. They control the money supply, so they really do have a lot of power over the economy. Monetary policy, one could argue, what the Fed does is as important, if not more important, than fiscal policy. Clearly, those are the twin towers of what impacts how the economy goes. And the fiscal policy that we have now is highly accommodative because you have the tax cuts, and monetary policy is in a sense offsetting that fiscal policy because it's tightening and it's raising interest rates, and they're looking like they're going to raise rates another 2 times. Now, I suppose that the Trump Powell is the Fed Reserve chairman, has not really shocked the markets yet, because one could take the Jackson Hole speech as that he wasn't exactly very hawkish, and maybe he is, and the Fed may reel in their expectations for more rate hikes, and they're not going to say it's because of Trump. What they are saying, which is another thing that's on the horizon, is they're worried about the trade tariffs. And so far, we have not seen any real impact from the trade tariffs. Now, these trade tariffs are large, they're wide-reaching, and they're with major trading partners: Europe, China, NAFTA, Canada, and NAFTA, Canada, and Mexico. And no one knows how they're going to work out, and they do have a potential to do a lot of harm. Now, the Fed thinks they can only do harm. They haven't calculated, as Trump has, that maybe there's some good that can come out of them. But let's discount what good could come out of them. And I believe they could result in better trade deals, which might be positive. What the Fed is concerned about is that they may have a further impact on investment in the United States, or a further impact on the farm sector, agricultural sector in the United States. So they're worried that it might have an impact. And if you're just looking for things to worry about, there's always a possibility when you make a broad, bold move that you might have some type of negative impact from the tariffs. But again, the markets have not sought any safe haven. They haven't sold off. They don't seem to be too concerned about the impact of tariffs. Now, the impact of tariffs is also, well, it's not the impact. There's a related issue, which is what's happening with the strength of the dollar. Now, the dollar is rising probably not just because of the Fed raising rates, but also because I think the market is favoring the U.S. in the trade war as well. Because if they weren't, then the dollar would be weakened by the position that the U.S. has taken. And I think also they know that the reaction from China would be to allow the yuan to weaken, or actually go ahead and weaken it itself, which in turn, in relation to the dollar, would make the dollar stronger. Now, this has a problem as well that has pretty much been discounted, and no one's really seems to be worried about it in terms of overall market sentiment. You could have an emerging market crisis in Turkey or any place, even China, who is paying its debts in dollars, and countries that are already stretched in terms of debt, which just about every country, Turkey, China, they're all up to debt, and they're up to their eyeballs in debt. And you could say, well, if it's just Turkey, it can be contained. But we know that all these economies are intertwined. There's a lot of foreign investment in Turkey. A lot of European banks have money in Turkey. And all it takes is for a certain amount of debt to default. And then you have this domino effect, daisy chain effect. And that really could become an issue. China, you don't even need to play scenarios. If China itself has a debt crisis, as its central bank governor said about 8 months ago, that they may have already be at the point where it's too late to stave off a debt crisis. They are in a point right now where they have issued so much debt. They were going to try to go on this deleveraging program about 6 months ago. Then the tariffs hit. Now they're saying they're going to manage their debt, but they've announced plans to issue more debt to try to keep the economy growing and to do more infrastructure projects and to lower the yuan and to try to keep the exports high. So that's another area where the economy, the markets have not reacted in any negative way. We don't see movement, equity markets going down. We don't see the gold and silver prices rising. Notwithstanding today's what I would consider minor moves, but these are issues that any one of them could really become a big deal. But then we move on to the biggest one of all, which relates directly to what I call Trump turmoil, and that is the midterm elections. And even before the midterm elections, talking about the Russian investigation and the obstruction of justice charges. Now, I've looked at those charges legally, and I thought, well, there's nothing there. And if you want to examine all of the fact patterns there, one can make the argument that it's all just concocted. And therefore, I've never viewed that as a threat to the presidency. I never saw how they might impeach him because of anything coming out of the Russian investigation or trying to obstruct justice. Because if he fires people, that's his right to do so. I don't think that's obstruction of justice. People can argue that it is, but you're not going to get 2/3 of the Senate to believe that the president should be impeached because he might have fired James Comey, or you're not going to get them without a definitive smoking gun to say that he colluded with the Russians, conspired with the Russians, unless there's definitive evidence. And so far we haven't seen it. So I've never thought that was the turmoil. What I thought was the turmoil was the fact that they were even conducting the investigation in the first place, which indicated a desire to actually try to take him out. And I believe that the reason they do this is because they want to reduce his standing in the polls. We've been through this, make him look illegitimate, that he somehow is the product of a tainted election. And that hasn't really worked because his approval ratings are pretty much where they've always been, probably a little higher. But the latest twist, which really has only happened over the last couple of days, is moving beyond the Russia probe. And now we're moving into this second district, federal district in New York, where you're bringing in Michael Cohen, you're bringing in new charges which have nothing to do with Russia collusion, have nothing to do with obstruction of justice, but start to get into the seedy side of politics and paying off porn stars and things of that nature, looking into whether they are campaign finance, Federal Election Commission campaign in-kind contributions that were not reported. And even that, I look at that and I say, okay, well, that's just making a big deal out of something. And again, if you do the legal analysis, you might come to the conclusion that that isn't a campaign contribution and it's really just a political issue. And it does highlight that Trump is involved with some seedy characters. His lawyer's seedy. He's confessed to tax fraud, to loan fraud, and he's also pled guilty to this campaign finance charge. But again, I don't think that would even lead to the type of turmoil that you would think that, well, you better impeach the guy because he has an FEC potential violation, which will never go to court. So even there, I could see how the courts might, not the courts, but the markets might discount all of this. However, in the last couple of days, it has taken a turn, I think, where it finally will start to create the type of turmoil that I was expecting because of the insistence that now they have to find something on Trump. And now what they're doing is they're using the Cohen guilty plea to, remember, the way they managed to find all this stuff out about Cohen, I think, is because they raided his offices and stole all the documents. And they're now using Cohen to widen the scope of Trump's business. And what they're probably going to try to do now, they've given immunity to the Pecker guy over at the National Enquirer. And even there, I think that's the same issue. That issue is basically, instead of one payoff to Stormy Daniels, that may be viewed as that Trump apparently may have been paying, or the organization, paying Pecker to plant favorable stories or to shut down unfavorable stories. But even there, that's probably the same issue with the Federal Election Commission, that if he had other reasons to do it other than for the campaign, that is probably not a violation. And that would just further sully his reputation, but probably not do the type of damage, and therefore the turmoil wouldn't be there. However, the big thing I think today, though, which probably will start to put the impeachment talk on the table as a real thing, was the granting of immunity of this Alan Weissenberg guy. Now, he's an old guy. He's been with the Trump, the Trump organization, I think, since the time of his dad. And he's been granted immunity. Now, what for? Well, it looks like now, this isn't Mueller. This, I think, is in the New York district. This is going to be non-federal law, so there's no people that Trump can pardon because they're under, I guess, New York law. And now it looks like they're going to be looking into the Trump business itself. Now, once you start doing that and you're looking for a crime, well, then they'll probably find it. And that's where things will get dicey. Because over the last 30 years, there's probably been things that are in that organization that they're now going to have access to. They're going to they'll probably somehow manage to get the tax returns. They'll probably somehow look at that $1 billion write-off he had and see whether that was a legitimate write-off. They can decide it wasn't, and now he has to pay back taxes. They could see all the warts and things that have been involved in that company, and certainly if they're looking to find stuff over 30 years of wheeling and dealing, clearly, just by chance, he's probably done something wrong, and something that'll be more damaging than trying to claim that talking to Comey and asking him, why don't you go light on Flynn, and trying to make obstruction of justice out of it. That's nonsense. That's not going to rise to the level of impeachment. However, and nor is paying off Stormy Daniels. Those are tempests in a teapot that people want to get excited over, but they're never going to be litigated, and no one's going to get that excited over it to bring impeachment proceedings and to convict him on a 2/3 vote in Senate. That's not going to happen. However, once you get into this seeming underside of Trump's business and more stuff comes out, that will damage him, I think, if indeed there's stuff there. Now, I don't know what's in the, obviously, how would I know what's in Trump's business? I'm just guessing that if a company of that size, there's bound to be payments, and I'm sure somehow there's a Russian somewhere that was paid. There might be payments that are unexplainable. You know, in real estate, maybe there's who knows what's in there. And even if they don't know exactly what something is, they can create a lot of doubt about this whole organization, his bankruptcies, his tax returns, his tax write-offs. And I think that's where it starts to get messy. Now, there's really not much he can do to stop this now. This is very clever on Mueller's part, because he could always have shut the Mueller investigation down, but then he would have looked like a dictator and authoritative and so on. But now that this has been passed off to the it's created an entirely new life with an entirely new angle, which has nothing to do with Russian collusion. And remember, the people were never excited about Russian collusion. They didn't really care. They were excited about what angle would it be that we could take Donald Trump down. So they don't really care that the Russian collusion angle is probably fizzled or that there's no obstruction of justice that'll take him down. They're now going to be cheering on whatever Michael Cohen might have to say, whatever this Alan Weissenberg might have to say, whatever this Pecker guy might have to say. And that, I believe, though, will have more legs. I think that you'll have more public opinion, more turmoil, more of a possibility that there might be impeachment proceedings. Now, do I think that they'll get 2/3 vote? It depends on what they find. But the idea now is that I think they could find something. Whereas before, I think whatever they had on the table, I didn't think there was any chance that he'd get removed from office. We talked about last night that Trump would be in a very powerful position if he indeed was impeached on those items, and it didn't go anywhere. Well, then he could just fire everybody and end the whole game. But what he's got now is he can't end the whole game, because the second district of Manhattan, whatever it is, the New York attorney generals that are going after him, can't shut that down. That he can't. That's not under his auspices, and that goes after his business dealings and him personally. So I think that is something that may start to worry the markets, may start to worry traders as they come back from their summer holidays. Now, today the stock market was up 133 points, NASDAQ up 67 points. So today was a big day across the board. The dollar index fell a bit, but it's still up to 95.16. And it will be interesting to see if there is U.S. political turmoil. Remember, the dollar is a safe haven, but the dollar can't be the safe haven, I don't think, when it's the U.S. itself. I mean, the financial crisis in 2008-9 originated in the United States, but it was still considered the safe haven for a while. Then gold and silver picked up that mantle for a couple of years, and then they lost that around 2011, 2012. So right now, I guess we're at a point where we have to wait and see what happens, how the markets react, and whether indeed, now, if this whole New York investigation into the Trump Corporation doesn't come up with anything, well then there's not going to be any turmoil really. But then you have to look at the midterm elections. Also, if the midterm elections, as we say, they don't result in a blue wave and you actually keep things the way they are, then even if they start to find stuff, I'm not sure that that's going to push things to the level of impeachment furor. If the Democrats win both houses and the Senate, and there's a lot of noise coming out of whatever they're finding in the investigations into the Trump organization, then you're going to have a cacophony. You're going to have the media yelling, screaming. You're going to have the Republicans that are doing all their counter investigation. They'll be shut down. And the Democrats will run these committees, and they'll be doing more investigations into Trump. Now, that would create turmoil, but it could also create a backlash. Who knows? I mean, you don't know how these things are going to shake out. So I would say we're at a position right now where we probably still have the potential for turmoil, but it doesn't look yet like the markets have decided they want to even think about that. They're still, and then maybe they won't until they come back from vacation in September, because I don't think today's gold and silver increases were not a reaction, at least the stated reaction wasn't because of safe haven bid, because they had granted immunity to this Alan Weissenberg guy, but more because of what happened right after Jerome Powell spoke, and that he looked like he was a bit more dovish. All right, well, that's about it for tonight. We'll be back again tomorrow. Let's see if we got any comments over here. Peter Larkin, and now why are we buying 600 billion in Italian bonds? Why? I did see something very quickly on that, Peter. I don't know, but, you know, they have, and I think the Exchange Stabilization Fund, the U.S., the Fed, they have all ways of helping out markets and with liquidity where they deem fit. I know they did it during the financial crisis. Money went places you'll never find out where it went. But this is why when the Italian lira got crushed, I believe that's because they allowed it to happen. The United States is clearly trying to trash the Turkish economy for political reasons, and that's why when the lira got crushed 20%, there was no buying of lira and the forex by the U.S. They weren't trying to help them at all. They figured this is what happens, and we're just going to allow whatever the natural market would happen. Because if you look in like markets that they tend to control, manipulate, gold and silver went up today, and you see this all the time. Whenever gold goes up, it goes up and then it just stops at a point where it just gets capped. We saw it after Brexit. It got capped and it stayed there for like 36 hours at the same price. It's just they don't allow certain markets to get away from themselves. And the Turkish lira, they just allowed to get totally crushed. And I guess with Italy, maybe they're trying to help out the Italian. I guess the yields are the Italians. This is the problem with the EU. They're not all the same economy, and it's foolish to think that the price of money is the same in Greece as it is in Germany, as it is in Portugal, as it is in Italy. And that's one of the problems that one of the issues that the Italians and the Greeks are worried about is that they don't control their monetary policy. So what they have to do is they have to be fiscally prudent, and in order to stay within the ECB's monetary guidelines. And that means they can't print their way out of stuff. They can't run deficits. And that means their bond prices are different. So maybe the U.S. is helping out there. DW, the left and the media just wants to keep pushing this story to take out Trump. Truth doesn't matter. Well, clearly, I mean, this was my point, was that when they started with the Russian story, then they moved to obstruction, and then they figured, oh, there was a real dramatic change in tactics when they raided Cohen's office in order then to move the whole investigation into Stormy Daniels, Federal Election Commission things, and now from there they move from federal elections. They could say, well, we also have this National Enquirer where similar payments might have been made. And then, oh, where were those payments made from? They were made from the Trump organization. So let's get Alan Weissenberg involved. And all this started out from Papadopoulos talking to someone in a bar about Russia. So you can see that if you want to get somebody, you just can keep digging further. And once you've run down a dead end, you make sure you have other avenues to keep things going. And that's what it looks like is going to happen. So that will ensure that we will have this type of turmoil, I believe, for at least as long as it takes for them to continue to push these. Now, the one thing that's interesting about impeachment, one of the reasons that Congress, the Senate would actually vote to impeach the president would be not just because they believe that whatever he's doing makes him unfit, but a lot of times, like with Nixon, if a president like Carter, when they're embattled, meaning that they're not doing well. Carter was an embattled president because he allowed the 444 days of the Iran hostage crisis to define his presidency. He didn't know what to do. He was stuck there. Nixon, same thing. He was under a lot of scrutiny, and he was still trying to figure out how to get. And he wasn't. Those presidents stopped doing their job. They were focused on being embattled. Now, if Trump continues, and he alluded to this today or yesterday, he said, if they impeach me, the market's going to go down. And he's probably right. And that's not a reason not to impeach him, though. But what I was going to say is that he will probably continue to do his job, meaning no matter what comes out about him, he's not going to then have Cuban Missile style crises for 3 weeks where he sits in the room with 20 advisors and they don't take calls. I think he'd just be out there still trying to do his job. And that may prevent him from getting impeached. Now, he may get through his term or may even get reelected, but he may not avoid on the other side when he's out of office criminal charges, if indeed they find anything in these New York type of things. And then, of course, they may not find anything. But the point is, he won't be able to pardon himself. And I think that's what they've done to ensure that there's always going to be something happening. Because Mueller's going to eventually have to go away. He probably will go away. I think he's turned this thing off to the point where now this Cohen, Weissenberg, Pecker, Stormy Daniels, Federal Election Commission, Trump Organization, that can be now the focus. They don't have to worry about Russia. They don't have to worry about obstruction of justice anymore. And he'll be gone, Mueller, before the Inspector General report comes out. Now, once that happens, though, this would really create a lot of turmoil, is if then Sessions says, okay, well, Russia's over. I don't have to worry about that. Now I'm going to focus on all the stuff about Russia, to vindicate why did you go through all this Russia stuff. I actually think that's going to happen. I think that the Russia thing was a ruse, and that's not going to be ultimately what damages Trump or even takes him down. It's going to be this other stuff that they're working on now. But if you have at the same time, and this is where you would really have turmoil, where you have, and this could result in a total loss of confidence in the entire government if not only is Trump under extremely unflattering circumstances about his company, his finances, payments, and so on, but that Sessions is simultaneously looking into all the stuff about Hillary Clinton, all the stuff about the FBI, the CIA, and so on. Well, then it looks like, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? That is very possible that we come into the fall. There's the Mueller investigation is over, but the New York investigation into the Trump Foundation, the Trump Organization is in full swing. Stuff coming out about that all the time. And then meanwhile, you have on the other side questioning the entire Russian narrative and Peter Strzok and all the players there, Page, Orr, and all the potential misdeeds they've done. Now you've got misdeeds at the highest level across the board. Everyone's being investigated. That could be a big deal. And I think that's what we've got to keep an eye on. I think if that is all happening simultaneously, you won't see the market shrugging off something like that, but you never know. All right, let's take a look. What other questions we got? Forget Italy MAGA. All right. Voraza. Hi, good night, and good weekend all. Greetings from Holland. Will the rally in PMs last, or haven't we seen the bottom yet? Well, who knows about that? Anyone else added to his or her position in mining shares, commodities? I didn't look. I know the mining shares are really battered. Everyone knows that, but I think 3 or 4 trading days ago, they might have been at their bottom. I think they've rallied up. Precious metals mining shares lowest ever relative to the gold price. They're very low. That is definitely true. I don't know. I don't have those historic ratios. Anyone who doesn't have a position yet should buy one now. Again, I don't give investment advice, but even if I knew the answer to that question, I wouldn't know. Because so far, I'm kind of astounded that the markets have not reacted to what's going on right now. It's not like I have any tremendous foresight to see what might happen over the next 2 or 3 months. These things have already been set in motion, and the markets presumably know this too. They just don't seem to care about it, or they think they're going to go away. I don't know. If you remember the .com bubble, the way that burst, it was obvious those companies weren't making money, and there was no reason for them to ever make money. Their business models were no good. And it wasn't really until Barron's wrote an article called .bomb that everyone was like, oh, well, why do I own this stock? Because it has .com after it. I don't know. I think maybe people are also just comfortable that they know that the central banks have their back and that there's they got call options on this stuff, and they're always going to come to the rescue to the markets, and that the markets are the safe place to be. Because they have been. Maybe it's recency bias. And, even after the big collapse in 08, 09, the markets came back. So who knows what the market sentiment is? Who knows who's pushing the buttons that make the markets move? And who knows what's going to happen to Trump? That's why we have these discussions every night. But I want to move off that. And tomorrow I should have out the Indian gold and silver numbers. And they're looking good again, and that's especially silver, and that's because of the lower price and the needs that they have. Oh, Anita A. Anything and everything will be investigated on Trump to keep the attention off the Clintons, Obama, etc., the real serious crimes. Well, it should be clear to anybody. That is definitely true. They are going to, now that the Russian thing has fizzled, they've now opened up an entirely new line of inquiry that will take years to unravel and subpoena. And that's why it was very big that they gave this Weissenberg guy, the head of the Trump organization, immunity. Because the reason they've given him immunity is because they want to find a crime. And they figure, well, we can't talk to this guy if he might have committed a crime just by being the guy that happened to be there. They're making it, if you worked with Trump, you're now in trouble. And if you're going to work with Trump, you're in trouble. And they're trying to isolate him. That's very clear. There might be a tech bubble that Tesla's and Amazon have very low earnings despite the market share. ASMR people, it's just amazing that people have valued, especially Tesla, the where it is when it doesn't have earnings, doesn't have any prospective earnings. And even though Musk said they were going to have cash flow positive, they weren't. And then he's been erratic, to say the least. And the car sales and the car performance hasn't been great. It's just amazing that company's worth $60-some-odd billion. I have to caution, says that's not investment advice to buy it or not buy it or short it. It's just amazing in general that markets have awarded market caps to companies, multi-billion-dollar market caps to companies that don't make any money. That was unheard of 20, 30 years ago. All right, we're going to have to call it a night. I want to thank everyone for listening tonight. Don't forget your Smaulgld mugs. Please, if you're going to get a mug, next shipment is tomorrow morning. I'm going to leave you the link. Go to the Smaulgld website. Get your Smaulgld mug or other Smaulgld products. The reason I say go to the Smaulgld website is that's where you can order the classic and the super classic mugs. Those are the ones I ship out personally with a note, and I throw in an eraser, a game changer eraser. But if you want other products like the Smaulgld espresso mug or the to-go mug, they're at the Smaulgld store. And also, I do appreciate if you enjoy this and the nightly discussions we have. Donations are always welcome. I did get 2 donations last night. Thank you very much for those. And also becoming a patron or donating via Bitcoin, Litecoin, or Ethereum. Again, I thank everybody for checking out the channel. Also, I'm on Minds, Gab, BitChute, Facebook, Twitter, and a new one, BitTube. So please be sure to go and check out those platforms, and also the Smaulgld.com, and subscribe there, and you get emails. Remember, after each of these broadcasts, I generally put together a blog post that has charts and some reference materials for what we discussed. All right, thank you very much. Have a good weekend, everyone. Yep, Verizon will be up in 5 minutes. Good night.